Our meeting today is hosted by Don Plato of Robert Half Management Resources, and he's going to tell us a little something about the market and some new branding that's going on with Robert Half. So Don, if you would, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Again, my name's Don Plato with Robert Half Management Resource. I'm the VP of Business Development. I've been hosting the FENG meetings 3 times a year for the last 13 years. So I'm anxious to get these face-to-face so we can give some money back to Blue Baby Moon Cafe that everybody enjoys so much. July 1st, Robert Half went through a new branding, and we had divisions like account temps and office team and a creative group. So it's now Robert Half Talent Solutions, and every one of the 9 divisions starts with Robert Half. So like account temps is finance and accounting contract talent. So if any of you are working and you don't hear account temps anymore, it's by design. And it's really to be less confusing. And one of the reasons we got rid of the temp, it sort of cheapens what people do for a living. Like you're just a temp. So that's completely went away. So anyways, that's brand new. One thing that I want to share with you about the market, it has been, I've never seen anything like this. There's an inventory shortage of professionals, just like there's a housing shortage. We have 5 people on our team. The youngest tenure is 9 years, and we're having trouble just finding people to interview. I mean, it's that tight. But I will tell you, our division globally, the consulting practice is 800 million, and we've exceeded pre-COVID revenues for 24 straight weeks. Like our division, this week we hit 600% of our budget. But it's been a real challenge finding people. And I'll share some unemployment rates for you as of July 2nd from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Financial analysts, 1.1%. Controllers, 3.3%. Accountants and auditors, 2.8%. And it just goes on from there. And that's nationally. And in our market, it's much lower. Like the unemployment rate nationally dropped to 5.8, and the Raleigh Durham, it's 3.7. So, and one of the things that's been a big change in our division, we used to have half the people we have deployed are full-time employees of Robert Half that we loan out. And it was formerly named Salary Professional Service, which has went away. It's now accounting and finance full-time contract work. So in order to make a lot of placements, we've actually had people make career changes, and the people that in this program have left permanent jobs, and they've taken a permanent job with our division. So one thing that I will share, I'd say 70% of my clients are still fully remote, and the plan each week that goes by more are coming back to the office, and the hybrid is the predominant model. And 2 to 3 days a week seems to be the sweet spot. I know we're not going to be forced to go back to work until Q1 of next year. I guess the other thing, right now there's like 9.2 million jobs open, which is an all-time record. I think part of that is from the unemployment stipend from the federal government, but people are getting back, and I can see this is probably the lowest attendance in a FENG meeting I've had in 13 years. And obviously people are back at work and probably not wanting to take time off to attend this meeting. So if anybody here is new and would like to discuss doing consulting work, I'll put my email address in the chat room. Just send it to me and I'll get your invoice over to our recruiting manager. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. One of the things that I want to talk about, you may have, some of you might know it, some of you might not, but you also, some people that are not aware of it might have noticed a person, very significant person who is missing, and that's the co-chairman of the Raleigh chapter, Jack Finley. Jack passed away very suddenly on June the 12th, just a couple days after our meeting, and from a heart attack, and nobody had any knowledge that this was coming up or anything. I wanted to just say a few words about Jack before we got into the introductions. One is, he was a great man. And I mean that, you hear people say about the funeral, oh, this was a wonderful person. Yeah, well, they weren't a wonderful person until the funeral came along. But Jack was a wonderful person all along. He was, a tremendous loss to this this organization to meet personally and professionally. And he was always ready to help others in whatever way he could, ready to network, ready to provide help, direction, whatever. I often turned to Jack when that'd be something that I was thinking about implementing here in the chapter. And with his vast amount of experience, I looked at him as a very strong peer that I could turn to and say, Jack, what do you think about this? You know, here's some thoughts. Excuse my phone. I'm sorry, folks. And just get his perspective, his sage judgment and wisdom. So there are also times when somebody passes away and you say, gee, I wish I had told him or her this, or I wish I had said this or that. And I must admit, at all the meetings, I tried to thank Jack for all the things that he did for the FENG. Many of the things you didn't see, coordinating speakers, coordinating things with our hosts, and Don Plato can vouch for that. He was a great person in that respect. And at times I wondered, gee, if I say thank you to Jack at every single meeting, is this becoming redundant or out of place? And I decided, no, it's not, because I really appreciated what he did for us. And I can say without any doubt, it was not too often. I'm so thankful and glad that that I took the opportunity to say thank you. Excuse me a minute. So for one last time, I'd like to say thank you, Jack.
Ted, can I take over just a little bit?
Sure.
This is a great lesson for everybody, and I think we all fancy ourselves as being dispassionate, cool professionals who are not emotional. Well, that's total BS. We all are. We need each other. And to me, the takeaway for this, Ted, and thank you for sharing this, and I'm taking this as an honor that you felt comfortable enough to have this reaction. Didn't meet that gentleman often enough. My loss. But the lesson we all need to take away is, who do we need to thank today? Who should we thank today for all the amazing things that they have done? Jack Finley's an amazing person. We also know quite a few others. Several people have volunteered today. Thank you. So who can we all thank? Let's pick at least 2 people today to thank. We'll say a little silent prayer for Jack, and I'm going to shut up, Ted. Back to you, pal.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate that. Jack was known for one other thing that I'd like to highlight. He set the bar. He set the top standard for introducing speakers. I've never met anybody that did as good a job as Jack did. Jack would sit there and he would get not just the bio, but then he'd go out and he'd research them and find out little tiny bits of information that were unique and interesting, and bring that in. And he stood there, whatever it was, and introduced the speaker right off the top of his head, like he'd known that speaker for years and he was an old good friend. And you never knew it, never once looked at notes. I'm not that good, but I'm going to take that as a challenge to try to give a totally unique introduction to our speaker today. And hopefully it will be acceptable to Jack and to Brian. So here we are. We're a bunch of financial executives, financial and accounting executives. And we sit back and say, who's this guy, Brian Doyle? What does he know? You know, the guy is an astrophysicist and a systems engineer. What does he know that's going to interest us in finance and accounting? And he's going to talk to us about leadership? Oh, come on now. Yeah, okay. He's got his own business. You know, he's got this business, Holden Advisors, and he does speaking and consulting and stuff like that. But, you know, why should I listen to him? And you say, well, he had a little bit of a leadership experience in the past. And that started off in the Air Force. And where he was, an Air Force pilot and commanded 33 combat missions in Kosovo. Well, I might say, and forgive me for this, I had lots of combat missions that I flew too. I flew almost every day, and I know for 3 or 4 months I didn't have a single day off. I flew every single day, multiple missions every single day. And I remember as I was a senior pilot in Vietnam, and one of the more experienced pilots teaching the new pilots coming on board, they still had a standardization to make sure that your standards were being met and that you're safe and you're doing a good job. And I went up for a standardization check ride one day with Goldsberry, whose nickname was Goldie. And we went out and flew and came back, did all the different stuff, and came back and post-flight the aircraft, went into headquarters and walked into the orderly room, and the company commander was there, and he said, how'd it go today, Goldie? And Goldie in his deep voice, never forget the words, good, damn good. You can fly that aircraft better than I can. And my jaw dropped because Goldie walked on water as far as everybody was concerned. He was the best. And for him to say that I could fly better than he could was one heck of a, and that was heck instead of what I really wanted to say, heck of a compliment. And then he said, he's the best pilot in the unit. The general deserves the best pilot. From now on, when we're flying the general, I want Bachman flying the general. And if we're flying more than one general, I want him flying the highest ranking general. And the company commander turned to our operations officer and said, Captain Fleischman, make it so. And I stood there just stunned that he said that. I must admit, I'm proud that that statement was made by Gold. I looked up at him as a mentor. He was the acceptance pilot for the Army at Bell Helicopter when the aircraft came off the production line. He taught me to be a test pilot. But I was really proud of the fact that I could be a general's pilot. Now I look at our speaker today, and then I look down through his resume and I say, wait a minute, this guy transported the presidential motorcade. I mean, I was flying generals, but he's got everything to do with the president. That sort of puts me in my place, I'd say. And so he just might have a little something to say. He focuses his efforts on improving leadership and helping his clients. He's helped them save more than $1 billion in revenue. That's significant. I always like to talk to clients, potential clients. I go into the attitude and the mentality is, I want to save them more money, far more money, 2, 3, 4, 5 times what he pays me, that I can save them. That's sort of my standard. If I can save a client more money and he pays me a lot more money than he pays me, I've done my job. But he's saved clients billions of dollars. So he's here to share the expertise and knowledge about how to work with the 5 different generations. And I know he talked to us before, but he's got a new twist today. And when he talked with us before, I learned several things from him that I thought were really good. Things that I thought, well, this is great. This is the way you normally do it. He said, well, if you're talking to this generation, Ted, that would make them feel uncomfortable. I go, wow, that would have made me feel great if somebody took that amount of time and gave that attention. But he has a knowledge and an insight he's going to share. And I will shut up now and say, Brian, if you would, please take it away. Thank you.
Got it. Ted, thank you so much for that personalized introduction. Let me make my attempt here. The hardest part of the whole presentation is to actually share the slides. And can everybody see that title slide and not a notes page? Okay, perfect. So ladies and gentlemen, picture this with me, if you will. I'm sitting in the boardroom of a Fortune 500 company. At the head of the table is the president and CEO, and assembled around the table are his direct reports, the senior vice presidents representing the different functions of the company. And directly to my left is an empty chair, which is supposed to be occupied by my 25-year-old employee. And as the president is finishing his latest story, I start to hear it from down the hall. Flip-flop, 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 flip-flop. And I can tell by the frequency of the flipping and the flopping that my millennial employee knows she's late for the meeting and has started to run. She shows up just in time for the president to finish his story, and she says, "Great, should we get going?" She then begins to address those senior vice presidents around the table, and she provides a very thoughtful and insightful analysis of why our company is not doing as well as we think we should be doing. She looks at our products. She looks at the competition. She looks at our sales force. And she tries to engage those senior vice presidents around the room by asking them questions. You know, is this what you're seeing? What have you experienced? And instead of being engaged, what I see from those older people around the table are heads tilted back, arms folded, and heavy sighs. So she finishes her presentation. I speak up and say, "Hey, are there any comments or questions?" You hear a little bit of, "Hey, thanks, nah, no questions, whatever." The meeting adjourns. I go back to my office, and that's when the parade begins. And the parade begins with those senior vice presidents, one at a time. And they all say something like, "Brian, what was that?" She shows up late to the meeting. She acts like she owns the place. She called me by my first name, and I've been working here for 20 years. She didn't even come to work yesterday where she should have been working on her slides. Brian, you got to do something about that. And after they left, my millennial employee came by and she said, "Brian, that was BS," except I'm pretty sure she spelled out the acronym. She said, "I worked really hard on that presentation. I tried to engage everybody. I even worked from home yesterday so I could just concentrate on doing these slides. And nobody was really paying attention. You got to do something about these people." And so it was at that moment that I realized that one person's perspective doesn't always line up with the perspectives of others. See, we all have this mental image of the perfect employee, the perfect teammate, the perfect manager, what they look like, what they talk like, what they act like. And that mental image is largely driven by our own experiences. So how we were raised, what it was like when we went to school, what was it like when we started to work? In other words, our view of the world is largely influenced by our generation. And I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody here on the phone that there is often a style and a communication breakdown between different generations. What we're going to spend a little bit more time on today, though, is how those breakdowns are exacerbated by COVID-19. So these are the generations that we'll be talking about today. And you'll notice that at the bottom, I've got Gen Z, and it says about 12 years old to 24 years old. And the reason I have that about, or that tilde there, is because there is going to be a break because of COVID-19. Now, we don't know exactly if it's 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds, probably just prior to starting high school when COVID hit. But this is going to change a generation, and there's going to be one coming after it. That is the post-COVID generation. And they're going to view the world differently than we did as pre-COVID people. And it would be pretty fascinating to see how this comes out. So let's talk a little bit about why these generations are the way they are. And the oldest generation is the matures. And they're about duty, honor, and country. This is a group of people who lived through, or their parents lived through, really austere times. So when we had our great recession of 2008 to 2012, we had unemployment reach 10%. We got a little blip of that with COVID as well. For this generation, homelessness reached 10%. Unemployment reached 25%. So these are people who are used to sticking it out. And I think the best example are the B-17 pilots from World War II. This is a group of people who were stationed in England. They would get up in the morning, they'd fly their mission over Germany, they would drop their bombs, and 25% of the airplanes would be shot down. The rest would come back to England, they'd go to bed, they'd wake up the next day, and they'd fly the exact same mission. And 25% of those airplanes would get shot down. So think about your own lives and think about how many of you would keep coming to work if 25% of your coworkers were killed in the process of doing your job. I don't need to, it's virtual. I don't need to see a show of hands. My guess is not too many of us. And there's a quote from a member of this generation that I think really encapsulates this. This is General Patton, and he says, if I do my full duty, the rest will take care of itself. Not inter-office politics, not, trying to get ahead, not, if I do my full duty, the rest will take care of itself. Now, the baby boomers, they're a group of people who are defined by their work. If you ask a baby boomer, and I think we have some on the call today, so if you ask yourself, somebody comes to you and says, hey, can you tell me about yourself? Baby boomers will immediately launch into, well, I'm a CFO at this particular company. I'm in charge of this many projects, this business unit. I have 15 employees. It's all about their work. And if you talk to them long enough, they'll tell you about their hobbies, and they'll tell you that they're married and they have children, but they start in with the work. And evidence of that is that their career is often on display. If you get a glimpse of a baby boomer's office, you will see plaques and certificates everywhere. And I had a chance to go into a baby boomer's office prior to COVID, came in, was turning to shut the door behind me for our meeting, and I noticed a framed certificate on the wall. And I was like, oh, this must be a big deal because it's framed. I looked a little closer. It was from Microsoft. And then I looked some more, and guys, it was from the early 1990s. And this person had framed their certificate from some tiny course they took with Microsoft because it represented a step that they'd taken in their career to get to where they are today. And so baby boomers do not have a lot of tolerance for people who want to skip steps, like sometimes the younger generations do. Baby boomers appreciate working longer hours, getting a little face time with their boss, and showing how much the work means to them. Now, this is a lot harder when it comes to everybody working remotely, these weird hours that everybody's working. Baby boomers have lost that ability to show up and be special because everybody's working from home. Everybody's working odd hours. The next generation is Generation X. And this is a generation that has often been called cynical. And the reason that they're called cynical is because this is the first generation, at least in the workforce, that started to question authority. And they question authority for two main reasons. One is they saw lifelong employment end. So whereas it wasn't uncommon for the mature generation to work for the same company for 30 or 40 years and then retire with a pension, Generation X saw their parents laid off en masse for the first time. So it started to erode the trust they have in big companies. The second major item that happened in their lifetime is that their parents were divorced at the greatest rates in history. And that's even compared to subsequent generations. So if you're of a certain age, you may remember the term latchkey children. That's Generation X. These are people who were raised by single parents. They came home from school. They let themselves into the house, unlock the door themselves. So that's, the latchkey children part. Made themselves dinner, finished their own homework, sometimes not interacting with their parents. And so that's made them self-sufficient problem solvers. The problem or the challenge sometimes with self-sufficient problem solvers is they're not the first as leaders to go give somebody the hug that they need because they're just not used to that. So let me engage you guys a little bit. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just type a number into the chat window. And then Ted or John, whoever, if you could just kind of read these out to me, because I can't see the chat window right now. on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, I love the mature generation. I totally understand them. God, these people are fantastic. To 1, I have no idea where these people are coming from and don't enjoy really working with them. How would you rate your enjoyment of working and communicating with matures? 10 is I love them. 1 is not so much.
We have
You can just-
1, we have several 8s, 6, 7, 10, 8, 7. So we got a whole wide range there.
Yeah, but it sounds pretty high. So
Pretty
great.
high.
Yeah.
high.
People like the matures. All right, let's do the same thing this time with baby boomers. Again, 10, love baby boomers. Based on the faces I see on the screen, I expect some high scores here. 10, I love them. 1, not so much.
8, 10, 6, 9, 10, 8. So you've got a whole bunch of high scores there.
I'd say
Okay.
it goes up 1 degree for sure.
Yeah.
All right, we got some generous voters here too. All right, one more for now. Generation X, 10, I love these guys. 1, I don't know, not so much.
5, 9, 7, 6, 6. Not so
All right.
high.
Feels a little bit lower, kind of middle range. All right. All right. So now let me ask you this. Same scale of 1 to 10. How do you enjoy working with and communicating with millennials? Just type it in the chat bar.
9, 6, 7, 7, 7, 9, 4. Lower.
Sounds like that one might be all over the place too. Got it. I did this poll once with somebody who was trying to show me the 0 and show me the 1 as best they could from the back of the room. So we got some generous voters. Generally speaking, and like we saw in our own poll, the millennials score a little bit lower. And even though every generation is different, we're used to at least working with matures, baby boomers, and Gen Xers. And so that's why they score a little bit higher, even if we feel like, maybe we don't see eye to eye with them 100%. So let's delve into why the millennials are different. And it starts with the fact that the millennials are the trophy kids. So if there was a race for millennial children, a running race, first place got a trophy, and 10th place got a trophy. And as you can see from the picture on the left, sometimes the trophies are as big as the children themselves. And it's not just athletics, it's grading. I have a friend who's an elementary school teacher. She grades all of her papers in purple. I said, why don't you use red like, we used to use back in the day? She said, red hurts their self-esteem. And it's not just elementary school, it's in college. There's a professor at Duke University who, instead of grading her students, has the students grade each other. So it's not hard to guess what the average score in that class is. It's an A. So what's happening here is expectations are being set, high expectations of what life is going to give back to you. And there's an awful lot of personal positive feedback. Now, less of that is happening as we go through this pandemic. It's not as personal. It's not face-to-face. It's not as touchy-feely because we can't touch and feel each other. So the millennials are the trophy kids, and those expectations continue because parents are way more involved in the millennials growing up than any generation prior. So as Ted shared, I was in the Air Force and recently retired as an admissions liaison officer for the Air Force Academy. And as part of that job, I would interview students for acceptance into the school. So I had a great student sitting across from me. I asked him for his resume. I had asked him ahead of time, did you bring your resume? Because I like to use it for a basis for a conversation. He said, sure, slid it across the table. It should be pretty good. My parents worked on it last night. And I thought to myself, how weird that his parents worked on his resume for him. And then I thought to myself, how weird that he told me. But the reason he told me is because he was raised as his parents' friend. They helped him with projects in school. They helped him get a job. They're helping him get a college scholarship. This is his life all along. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal of a young businessman was given a project by his manager. The deadline came and went. The manager came and asked him, hey, what are the results from the project? He said, oh, I forgot about it. Why didn't you remind me? Well, if you've been reminded of things your entire life, you come to work, you tend to think that that parental figure is probably going to remind you too. So with that as a backdrop of why the millennials are different, let's talk a little bit about how the millennials are different. These are group-oriented, collaborative leaders. They have been taught to work together in groups since kindergarten. And it is a skill that is awesome because when we get into the workplace, there are often times that we have to work in groups, and people who can be collaborative leaders is great. There is a challenge that comes along with this, however, too. Back to my college interviews for the Air Force Academy, I'll typically ask a student, tell me about your leadership experience. And somebody will say, oh yeah, I was on the prom committee. Oh, awesome. So what did you do for the prom committee? Well, there were 5 of us, and we worked on every aspect of the dance for the prom. Oh, that's cool. Okay. So what specifically did you do? And they think and they say, well, there were 5 of us. We all worked together. And I said, yeah, but like, what did you own? What was your job specifically? And they go, there were 5 of us. We worked together. And so the challenge here is if you have people who are used to working together all the time, if you hand them an individual assignment, it's going to be tougher because they're just not used to doing things, right off on their own. This is another place where COVID comes into play because I know we've got Zoom and we can, collaboration tools, but sometimes it's just harder not to be in the same room as everybody else. And if you're used to that collaborative environment, it becomes even harder. This is also a group that is very comfortable with diversity. And if you think about the future of business, it is not a bunch of older white men. And so people who can work with groups that are not exactly as the same as theirs is going to be a big advantage. Millennials are also multitasking experts. So anybody who knows a millennial knows that they can stream TV while they're working from home, while they're texting and they're posting on Instagram and they're eating a bag of Cheetos. So for older generations, that feels like it's unfocused. But when you consider the flow of information that is coming into our lives, doesn't it make sense to have people who can do a few things at the same time, or at least switch rapidly from one thing to another? They also have huge goals, but sometimes struggle with the execution. And I'll share a story from my own childhood. One time I walked in, my dad was watching television. I stood in front of the TV so he'd have to pay attention to me. I said, Dad, I want to be a professional football player. And he said, you'll never be a professional football player. Look at you. You're tall and skinny. Those are big, strong men. You'll never do that. You'd be a failure if you did that. Very direct feedback. So as I started to slink away and I was disappointed, my dad said, you know what? You want to be a big, strong man? I said, yeah. He said, why don't you go mow the lawn? Lawn mowing builds muscles. That's how it used to be when you got feedback from older generations. But today's parents say, you can do anything you set your mind to. You can be anything you want because you're special. And even the word special means different things to different generations. So for millennials, it's every person is unique. The future possibilities are endless. For Gen X, It's reserved for people with physical or mental disabilities like the Special Olympics. And for the two older generations, it is an insult. As in, what do you think you are? Special? So we've got two things colliding when they come to millennials working at different companies. And here's a stat actually from Robert Half. How long millennials expect to pay their dues? 16% less than a year. 51% 1 to 2 years. So that's 2/3 of all millennials expect to quote unquote pay their dues for less than 2 years. Older generations freak out on this. This is matures would work in the same job at the factory for 30 years and then maybe get promoted to foreman. This is a challenge as leaders to figure out how do we create steps towards success, even if they don't include a promotion, like maybe more client-facing responsibility. It's also a challenge in this remote environment that COVID has started, because like you, most of us have meetings that go back to back to back. We don't have to walk anywhere. We just turn on the next Zoom. So your younger employees are starting to feel ignored. They're starting to feel left behind because we're just going to meeting after meeting after meeting. So that's the millennials, but there's a generation after them that we call Gen Z. So let me bring you back in. Let's do another poll. If you type into the chat window real quick, on a scale of 1 to 10, again, 10, I love working with Gen Z. These are people less than 24. They're your brand new employees. I love working with these guys. 1, don't understand these people, uncomfortable hiring them.
8, 6, 5. Not much of a response right now.
Dive in there. Scale of 1 to 10, just type in the chat window.
Yeah. 7, 6.
So maybe a little bit lower, sounds like a little bit lower, Ted, than some of the others?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
Okay. So here's one of the perspectives that makes it challenging for Gen Z. And I think some of us as older managers, older leaders, we can feel it. And that is that Generation Z had their formative years in the Great Recession. They saw their parents get laid off. They saw homes being foreclosed. Even if they didn't know what a 401k was, they knew that their mom and dad were upset that theirs was half as big as it used to be. And what that did was it eroded commitment. It along with technology, really helped spawn the gig economy. So there's a stat here from a survey that I just think is crazy. 61% of high school students would prefer to be an entrepreneur when they get out of college. 61%. Seems like a giant number. But these are people who are used to doing a couple of different jobs. You probably know somebody who works at the office during the day and does something different on the weekend. They're selling jewelry, they're driving for Uber, whatever it is they're doing. There's not that, all-in commitment on one company. Your younger employees aren't really working for you. They're working for themselves. Now, that doesn't make them bad employees. It doesn't make them bad people. But I'll say it again, your younger employees aren't working for you. They're working for themselves. And they're looking for different things. One of them is meaning. 9 out of 10 said that meaning was the most important part of their job. So working on something important, not just about the paycheck. Paycheck's important too, but not just that. And our world is in a tumultuous situation right now with a variety of things going on. People want to make a difference, and this generation especially cares about that. So what is that meaning that you can give them? And it means maybe perhaps the opportunity for promotion too. What is your company doing? What do they get to do to make the world a better place? Gen Z is looking for fast answers and mentors, not managers. So this is a group of people who have never lived in a time where they couldn't ask their phone or the little disc on the counter a question and get immediate answers. So my baby boomers on the call today, while you would love to share all your wonderful, life lessons, I'm telling you that Generation Z is not 100% interested in all of that detail about your work career. What they are interested in is having a mentor to help them navigate their organization, help them navigate life. They're also looking for work-life integration. So while Gen X was really the first generation that said, hey, I want work-life balance, this is work-life integration. These are people who are, going to work hard for you at 1 o'clock in the morning, but they may want to show up at 10 a.m. And particularly for our baby boomers on the call, this is going to be hard for you because the average baby boomer says, if I can't see you working, you're probably not working. And in this era of COVID, we can't see people working. We have to base our measurements on results, not just, can I see you sitting at your desk from 8 until 6? And if you stay to 6:15, you must be doing a better job. Generation Z is like the millennials in that they are group oriented, they are diverse individuals, they are multitasking experts. However, they are nonverbal. It's a group of people that never had to call the store to see if a toy was in stock, or call the restaurant to get a reservation, or even call their friends to get together. All that stuff is done on the phone typing. And so in many respects, that creates some shallower relationships. I have 1,000 friends on Facebook. That's the old guy's version, Facebook. I got 1,000 followers on Instagram. Okay, so how many of those people are actually your friends? Probably not that many. And when you take this generation and you put them in a remote location where they can't go to college or they can't go to high school, and they have to just sit and watch the teacher on the video, that exacerbates this lack of relationships. It exacerbates this lack of being verbal, and it's really challenging now, and it's going to be really challenging when all of them show up to work, because they're not going to be used to interfacing with people the same as us on the phone. This is what yesterday's junior associates look like, and I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor here, Don Plato, for letting me use his prom picture. Don, I appreciate that. This is what people used to look like. This is what people look like today. Is the guy with the tattoos a bad employee? You don't know. Is the woman with, she's got a nose ring, she's got tattoos, she's got pink hair, is she a bad employee? We don't know. And this goes back to what our parents told us decades ago. You can't judge a book by its cover. So what we have to learn how to do is communicate across the different generations. And what I found to be most critical is not just communicating across the generations, but communicating in the context of your own generation. It's not enough to say, treat millennials like this, and as long as you stay in this box, you're good. There's things that matures are good at that connect with millennials. There's things that baby boomers are good at that connect to Gen X, and vice versa. So we have to learn how to do that. And Don mentioned at the beginning that I created this generational leadership matrix, and I'm well aware that you can't read this. I'm going to teach you how to use it, and then we're going to send it after the meeting today so that you have the opportunity to use it. But the idea here is to think of things in terms of leadership and employees or followers or coworkers, whoever you're trying to communicate with. And so you would come across the top of that matrix and you'd find your own generation. Let's say it's baby boomers. And then you would come down the page to find that group that you're leading or that generation that you want to communicate better with. In this case, we'll just say millennials. And in each of those boxes, you will find 4 tips, one on each on how to recruit, train, manage, and inspire that generation in the context of your own. And you'll find some pretty interesting things here. Like one, which we really expand on in our book, is appealing to parents. So millennials have grown up as their parents' friends. When you are recruiting them, there's an opportunity here to wow the parents. And now in college, as students are starting to graduate from college, instead of having an open house for a company where the students attend, there are several companies that have open houses where the parents attend. And they make the sales pitch to the parents who then influence their children. So let's go into some best practices in each of these categories. And the first one's recruiting. So Bank of America does a nice job on this. This is an ad from them. Join our team and we'll guide your ambition through training and mentoring. Remember, the younger generations love training and mentoring and growing and recognize their ambition because they have these huge goals. We'll help you apply your drive to real world problems with real impact. Oh man, I want to make a difference. Meaning is super important to me. Bank of America is tapping all of those things that younger generations are interested in. When it comes to training, think back to that Wall Street Journal example that I shared about the young businessman who got the project, didn't finish it on time, and was hoping for a reminder. When it comes to managers, we have to check in more often. We have to make sure that they are comfortable maybe working alone or doing what they need to do. And for the millennials and Gen Z, my advice to them is to meet the deadlines and to offer some progress reports so that manager gets more comfortable. This is a bigger deal when your employees are remote. You have to set a reminder or a timer or something to reach out to people because you're not going to bump into them in the hallways. And as Don was saying at the very beginning, even when we come back to work, it's probably 2 or 3 days a week. It's not 5 days a week. So this is going to be different. We have to put more effort into it. When it comes to managing, remember, millennials they're group oriented, Gen Z the same way. They're not used to working individually. So managers can assign smaller projects where it's less than 100% success is okay. And the analogy I'd share with you now is when I was flying the C-17, which is what that's a picture of, I knew that on a clear day, I could let my co-pilot fly down to 500 feet, even if he was having a rough day, even if he was spazzing all over the controls. I knew that if I could take control of the airplane at 500 feet, we could land safely. I couldn't do it at 300 feet. So it's the same sort of thing with younger employees and their projects at work. There comes a point where you can let them work and fail and learn. And then you know where that point is where you have to take control because the CEO is going to see this and we got to make sure it's right. Or it's going out to the client. We got to make sure it's right. So starting with some smaller projects and letting them learn from that is a great technique. And then what I teach the younger generations is to look for those smaller projects. And then lastly, it's about inspiration. And Vail Resorts do a really nice job with this. They have what they call joy reinforcement. And what that means is if you are an employee and you can do something that will reinforce the joy of the customers at Vail Resorts, then you're doing the right thing. You're empowered to do it. Go. And when you think about how millennials and Gen Z want to have more meaning in their life and they want to, be able to reach out and try some new ideas, this is a great way to do it. So managers need to be open to new ideas. And then the younger generations, Well, you got to have thick skin. I mean, sometimes they're, they're not good ideas. Sometimes not all ideas are good ones. So millennials and Gen Z have to continue to have that thicker skin. But now in particular, when it comes to COVID and it comes to this different circumstances that we're living in, it is really important to think about maybe we need to create some new rules or create an environment for new ideas, because no one has thought through what we've just gone through and this new reality that we're in right now. No one has. So let's create an environment where people can share some better ideas. So I've got a few points here to finish up with. So I'd like to save myself about 5 minutes here at the end. But for right now, let me take some of your questions. Probably easier to type them into the chat window. And then Ted, if you want to just read them out, we can go through some questions.
Glad to do that. Don, you're on. Earlier, you had raised your hand, Don. Is you still have a question, or did Brian answer that in the rest of his presentation?
Yeah, he did answer it. Thanks, Ted.
Okay. Actually, Don Plato, I was talking to Don Mangus.
Just
Thank
real quick, Brian, you said that
Yeah.
there were two things that the Gen Xers really learned to question authority. One was that they saw that the parents had their security ripped out from under them. What was the other?
It was divorce.
Divorce?
Yeah, so their parents got divorced at the highest rates in history, and that eroded that kind of family trust at the same time that their trust in corporations was eroding. So it was a double hit to their psyche.
So if you had to come up with a summary statement or two of how to deal with each generation, Brian, what would you do? How would you say it? I mean, I think, you gave a pretty good indication. A lot of us are gray hairs, and if we aren't baby boomers, we're pretty close to it. There are some younger, not so gray haired people on this call, but then you talk about the XYZ and the millennials. If you could sort of say, like the one you're just talking about, okay, they have disease, have thin skin, so you need to be a little careful how you word things to them, and try to keep it in a positive reinforcement, growing in a good direction, starting off with small tasks and small jobs and assignments, and then build up. What would be something that you might say? Here's a quick, from the simple-minded thing. If I have one or 2 points to think about for each generation, what are some of those that I should keep in my mind as a manager?
So Ted, I feel like there's a balance here, and the balance is, we don't want to start at one end of the spectrum and say, hey, everybody's different, everyone's completely unique. You got to treat every individual in a unique way. That's tough, and it doesn't get to what you're asking about my 1 or 2 points. But what I also want to be careful about is that we don't narrow these boxes so small that we say, okay, if you're working with millennials, you need to reward them all the time with positive feedback and let them do whatever they want, because that's not right either. And so what I want to do is send you guys out, and I know you've seen it, that generational matrix. And the feedback I've received is that that's kind of the right balance. And so the reason it works is because I don't want to tell you, you're a baby boomer, here's a millennial, this is exactly how you do it. And then you go, okay, great. Now, how's the Gen X guy relate to the millennial? Is it the same? Is it the same way? And the answer is no, because baby boomers are generally a little bit more group oriented. They like sharing their work history. They like sharing their experience. They want to be mentors. That's a great fit for millennials who are looking for mentors. And they're not going to be tolerant of all of your detail, but they're looking for somebody to kind of help them navigate the organization. For Generation X, I'm a self-serving problem solver. I don't really want to work in groups. I'm not somebody who's gonna, instinctively go check on somebody 3 times a day and give them positive feedback. So I have to be much more aware of that and play to my strengths, which are going to be a little bit different than what a baby boomer's strengths are. And so I'm cognizant of not answering your question here, but I think that viewing these relationships in the context of your own generation, I think that's the way to look at it. And if you use that matrix and you come to that box, then instead of 2 tips, I'm going to give you 4, and that, that can answer your question depending on the circumstance. Are you going to let me off the hook with that one?
I am very much,
Okay.
Brian. Thank you.
All
I
right.
remember when you had that matrix before, and we did exactly what, in one of the exercises where we looked at that and came from here and here and said, oh, here's what it is. So that was an unintentional setup there, Brian. John, you had a question you want to relay from Janet.
Yes, Janet Chen asks about when you have a mixed group in a meeting, Brian, how best to get everyone engaged? And I guess it's depending on your generation, but what are a couple tips from a couple of the generations?
So, everybody wants to make a positive difference. If you've got employees who don't want to make a positive difference, that's probably an issue that's independent of generation, and it might be time to, thank them for their service. But if you've got different groups in there, you can work toward this common purpose, which typically brings people together. And then when you're working with the different individuals, you can use different techniques. So common purpose brings folks together. And then for instance, your generation X, you're going to say, hey, this is what I need from you, and this is when it's due. Let me know if you got problems. See ya. And your millennial employee or your Gen Z, you may spend a little bit more time with. Hey, I want to make sure you know what you're doing. Let me give you a little feedback along the way. Let's take smaller steps. A question that I've received a couple of times that I think goes along with that, so I'll answer another one, is what do I do with team building? Is there a certain thing that I can do with team building? And one of the techniques that I've found is charitable outreach. So all generations will work together for, whether it's Habitat for Humanity or they have Rise Against Hunger has the meal builds where everybody works together if it's not quite as physical. I used to take some of my teams to go shopping for Angel Tree kids, so these are the kids who don't have a regular Christmas, and you can buy gifts for their parents to give to them. That's something that I've found that charitable outreach is something that brings lots of generations together and gets them on the same page. And then like I said, you can treat people differently on one-on-one situations. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. We have a question from Raja here. He said, can you comment on how global these generational categories are?
Yeah.
I'm unsure if how these generations evolved is unique to the US.
Right, great question. So the generational matrix you'll see is not just US, but it is more, quote unquote, Western countries. So Western Europe, United States, Canada, Australia, all of those type countries definitely fits. It also fits with countries that are more economically challenged. However, people tend to slide one generation over. So here's what I mean. A millennial in Central America or a millennial in Eastern Europe acts more like a Gen X person. So they slide over, and those Gen X people tend to act more like baby boomers as depicted here on the generational matrix, or as I'm talking about this. They tend to slide one over. Now, I've had, when I speak to big groups, I'll have people come up from different countries, raised in different places, and that's the feedback I'm receiving is, yeah, with those years you gave me, I I'm in this generation, but the way I was raised, I'm really more over here. And it's because there weren't the economic opportunities to raise the expectations of those kids as millennials. It was really the generation that followed, Gen Z, that is starting to feel that a little bit more, where everybody's got a phone, everybody's got a laptop, there's TV sets in nearly every bedroom, and so on. So it definitely still works, but it's you gotta slide everybody a little bit.
One other question here. Tom Muffin stated or asked, isn't there also a technological gap because millennials and Gen Zs have grown up with technology while boomers did not?
It does make a difference. So when we talk about that work-life integration, as boomers and particularly Gen X, it was always work-life balance. I will work hard for you until 5:30, then I'm going home. And there wasn't the technology, at least when we started our careers, to really call me. I mean, they could call you at home, but they're calling you your home phone number. It's not the same. You couldn't receive email. You couldn't receive a text. And so, one, it facilitated that work-life separation, but it also made us more used to that's the way it should be. I work very hard during the day and then I'm done. And because of technology, those two younger generations are so much more connected. And so, one, they're used to having those connections, and it's like, yeah, I'll finish this thing up at 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. I'm cool with that, but I'm going to have to go meet my friend for coffee at 9 a.m. So I'm not, I'm not going to be in the office. So there is that that different element. Another place, which is, probably an hour in itself, is just the communication. So if you grew up texting everybody you knew, and now you get to work and you text your 60-year-old manager, there's a pretty decent chance that the 60-year-old is going to say, what in the world? I've been working here for 35 years and now I'm getting texts from this kid. I don't like it. And so there has to be a meeting of the minds of how you want to be communicated to and with. Not to suggest that every baby boomer can't text, but there is a difference between how that's received and what it's perceived as professional or not professional. I think we got time for one more and then I'll finish up.
Okay, I'm going to do something, folks, and Brian and I never once mentioned this, but I think I was going to talk about his book, Gray Goldfish, Navigating the Gray Areas to Successfully Lead Every Generation. I was going to make a little bit of a quip in my introduction, and I missed it as I went through it, Brian. But and I was going to say, is there someplace they could get it? But folks, if you look at the chat box, John put out the link for the book for John's book if you want to get it, Gray Goldfish. Okay. There was one more question here, and let me find it. Here's another one from Janet. I had bosses that thought I should work hard all the time, even during the weekend. Even they might be in the late 30s. How do we address that? If a boss in the late 30s expects you to work weekends, almost like a baby boomer mentality.
Yeah. So Janet, at first blush, that feels like independent of a generation and just somebody who is a workaholic, not necessarily connected to, their generation that they want you to work all weekend. And that's really, I mean, you probably come to this on your own, but that's really where you just have to have the conversation of, hey, I love what I'm doing. If that in fact is the case, I want to do a great job, but I need to have this time to recharge my batteries, take care of my family, whatever it is. And if that person continues to push on you, I need you working 7 days a week, might be time to look for something else. So I know that's not necessarily a generational thing, but what you can do is think about what matters to that person in that generation, and then maybe use some of those as talking points for making your point. So what's going to matter to them, not so much what's going to matter to you. So guys, thanks for the questions. These are really good questions. I appreciate it. I want to finish up here with the bottom line. And that is that we all have this mental image of the perfect employee. And like we talked about, that image is largely driven by our own generation. And so if we view the world through those lenses of our own generation, we're going to miss out on great ideas and great people and great work. But if we take off the lenses, that's when we can see what each generation brings to our lives, whether it be personal lives or professional lives, and understand where they might struggle and understand where their strengths are so that we can get the most out of everybody, especially in this really unique time in which we live. And so, let's take those lenses off and better connect with our employees, our peers, and like we were just talking about, like even your boss. So, Ted, I appreciated you making a pitch for the book here. If you're interested in more examples, more funny stories, and hundreds of case studies of companies who do this right, Stan Phelps and I wrote a book called Gray Goldfish. And John, I appreciate you putting in the chat window the link to it. It's on Amazon, and it's feedback's been great. I think we're still averaging 5 stars there on Amazon, so that feels pretty good. Link with me on LinkedIn if you would, and you could even just do it right now since we're all sitting in front of our computers. Just link in to Brian Doyle at Holden Advisors, and if you've got questions that didn't get answered, or gosh, you know what, after we hung up, I sort of thought about this or that, just reach out, send me an email. And I'm happy to answer the one-off question for your particular situation. Like I said, I'll be sharing that generational matrix with everybody. And once you get that, if you've got questions on how to use it or, how it works, by all means, reach back into me with this email address right here, brian@doyleleadership.com. So I am great. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful questions. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate you taking time to share your insight again. And, I started off the introduction by saying, who's this guy, Brian Doyle? Well, I guess my answer is, ladies and gentlemen, that's who Brian Doyle is. He has learned to take his military leadership skills and bring them into business, and he helps other people do it. So in this perspective on the multi-generations, I still sit back and scratch my head, and I'm going to look for that matrix. And I know I had it before, but I want to save it electronically as well, if I haven't done so previously, because when I used that matrix before, it sure did answer a lot of questions, because I'm one of those old fogey baby boomers, and I need to constantly look about how do I handle, what do I say that's going to be well received and the best way to say things for each of the different generations and how they feel like. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.